Love kicking off the week with these two. Gemma Tognini from GT Communications here on the desk with me, and over in Perth, Caroline DeRusso, host of the Royal Report. Let's sort out the world. I want to start with something we really didn't focus on enough last week. And Gemma, they kind of snuck it through, Labor, through the lower house last week while everyone was focused on the American election. This misinformation, disinformation bill, big trouble.
Well, I mean, that's a red flag in itself, the fact that they're, letting the fox into the hen house in the dead of night when everybody's distracted with other things. I mean, the premise of a government deciding what is misinformation and disinformation in this context is absolutely terrifying. And I think a really powerful recent example that everyone can relate to in the cold, hard light of day is the COVID situation.
Yep.
We were lied to.
Yep.
We were told with a bare face by governments of all persuasions, I might add.
Labor and Liberal, that we were all going to die if we watched the sunset, that we're all going to die if the borders were open. We were told an all unmitigated amount of BS in the name of truth. And we all know that it wasn't truth. It was polling-driven diatribe. Yep. Everyone should be extremely concerned about this legislation. And if Mr Albanese isn't paying attention to where elections are going globally in the face of this sort of stuff, well, then he deserves what's on the receiving end of his. And they secretly censored us during COVID, both Labor and Liberal. And Caroline, this is the point. They secretly censored us during COVID, and yet now they want more power over information and misinformation. These are the same mob who tell us every day that renewable energy is cheap and reliable. I mean, and they're going to be the arbiters of truth. It's ridiculous. No wonder Anthony Albanese is now trailing in the polls.
And look, the thing is, we saw what happened when this wasn't legislated. So why would we give them a stick to be able to do this and more? And you think about the number of people who were cancelled, the number of people that were just cowered into silence. No one was allowed to have an opinion about anything. And I mean, we've spoken on this show plenty of times. I would rather err to the side of more speech than less speech.
Yep.
If there is a dumb idea, let it be picked to pieces in the cold, hard light of day in front of everyone. And I think ultimately that leads to a much better society overall, because then at least people know that if they're going to say something, then they're going to have to back it up. Because if people think that there is no consequence to their behaviour, and the government is the perfect example of that, well then why wouldn't you push that even further, because you know that there's no one who can ring the bell on your BS. Look, the trailing in the polls thing, Chris, that is this and a whole bunch of other things. Consistent, stunning underperformance by this government. And I think the Australian people, we're all for a fair go and, let this government go and see how they do and all those sorts of things. And I think the Australian people have worked out that they're all fur coat, no knickers, and can we please have an election?
Yeah, well, I think fundamental stuff like the cost of living and energy is really driving it. But I think this misinformation bill shows how they're just out of touch with mainstream concerns. I just want to show a headline here with Winston Peters, the New Zealand Foreign Minister, and he's been a long-time political power force, really, in New Zealand. He's kind of New Zealand's Pauline Hanson in many ways. He says our COVID inquiry was a whitewash. We need a royal commission. Well, you're singing my song there. Chris Mitchell was great on that in the Australian Today. And we see that Albo is behind on Newspoll, Gemma. That's the second month in a row. Perhaps more importantly, checking on the betting platforms today.
Oh, yeah, that was pretty telling.
They have the coalition now favoured to actually form government. It's a big call. It's going to be tough for them. But all the portents are heading in the wrong direction for Labor, and all strength to Peter Dutton's arm.
I did an event with Peter Van Onselen at the Sydney Institute about 6 months ago now. Actually, it was June, so I don't know, 4 months ago. And I am not a pollster, as you know. I don't operate in the political realm in a professional capacity, but I'm 51. I've been around. I was a journalist. I'm now no longer a journalist. It doesn't surprise me. And at that event, I was quite bolshy and said, look, you can lose 19 seats, you can win 19 seats. People who've been saying, oh, no, it's too many seats, we won't get them back. Well, if you can lose them in one hit, you can win them in one hit.
No,
but I think...
I agree.
I also don't believe that this government has ever adjusted to being a government. They've never adjusted to the account. Listen, the price of leadership is accountability.
Yep. We don't see any of that. And as for the teals, the hypocritical teals, we're all about transparency. They're all backing the misinformation bill. What a bunch of hypocrites.
Don't forget, your teal MP is backing this misinformation bill, which brings me to another story, courtesy of the Daily Telegraph today. They've had a look at the teals and the Labor MPs who are loud on climate change and where they've bought their beach houses. Yes,
brilliant.
That's right. Allegra Spender and Zoe Daniel and Tony Burke and Chris Bowen, they've all got houses down at the beach. They're all telling us, Caroline, that the boiling oceans are going to rise and drown us all, but they're all in for their own beach houses. What hypocrites.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? You would think if you were so worried about this, you'd all be buying places up in the mountains. I don't know if any of them do have places up, but not that we got a lot of mountains in this country, but, you know, so to speak. Go and get yourself a tree change. All have beach houses. And then I wonder, I ask myself this question. If you're going to buy yourself a beach house, either you know what you're peddling is total rubbish, or you actually believe it and you think that by all of us, you know, drinking out of paper straws that somehow we're going to change the climate of the earth. I'm really not quite sure where they sit in either of those camps. Perhaps there's a bit of Venn diagram.
I can tell you where they sit.
But it is actually terrifying. It is actually terrifying, the level of hypocrisy, but not just that, the way they hector. The way they hector normal, everyday Australians, those mere mortals,
well, let me...
that you should pay more for your energy bill because we're going to save the planet. I just find that rank.
Let me just, before I go to Gemma, show another example, and that is the Albanese government's climate ambassador. She spent $250,000 flying around the world. She's got a carbon footprint the size of a woolly mammoth, Gemma.
Carbon footprint the size of a developing nation in sub-Saharan Africa, I think, although they don't have access to clean energy, so probably a bad analogy. But this is another layer in the the hypocrisy of the Albanese government, but they treat the electorate like mugs, and they should work out that enough of them have been around long enough now, Chris, to know that you can't treat the electorate like mugs. You can't turn around and go, you don't get to fly, but she's allowed to fly. You don't get to eat a burger, but I'm going to eat a burger. You don't get to do anything, but I'm going to have my beach house. You know but it's like
we're going to be eating grasshoppers and staying at home while they're at the beach houses and flying overseas.
I'm buying beef in bulk. It's like the Chief Health Officer of South Australia said, it's okay, you can do your isolation in your beach house. Remember that comment?
Right. Yeah, unbelievable.
This is what we're dealing with. And if this government cannot hear the bell tolling...
Yep, wake up. Thanks for joining us, Gemma and Caroline. I appreciate it.